Hi, my name is Stephen McGee, and I am the author of Health Forensics and Hypoxia, Mental Illness and Chronic Fatigue. That's me. I'm standing on top of the world's largest telescope, the W.M. Keck Observatory, at the top of Mauna Kea in Hawaii, and that is the Subaru telescope. So we're here today to look into toxic altitude. That's me. That's the world's largest telescope, the W.M. Keck Observatory, on a nice sunny day atop Mauna Kea. And the chapter we're going to do today in the book is called Altitude-Induced Suicide. So you'll find that on page 60. So let's take a look at this chapter. Altitude-Induced Suicide. Altitude-induced suicide is becoming increasingly well documented. What is it? It has been noticed the higher an area is, the higher its suicide rate is. There is extensive documentation in the following areas. Suicide belt. The Rocky Mountain states are called the suicide belt due to their high altitude and higher rates of suicide. Utah paradox. High altitude Utah has high rates of suicide and depression that is contrasted to the high rate of happiness, and this is called the Utah paradox. Hypoxia blues. Sea level adapted humans living in high altitude cities are known to develop fatigue and or depression symptoms that are known as the hypoxia blues. So all this is very well understood in the USA. So there's three very distinct types that are being documented. So the suicide belt is in the high altitude Rocky Mountain states, so that's kind of Colorado area and surrounding areas, surrounding states around there. It's kind of a belt. It goes from north to south, from up on the Canadian border through Colorado down to the Mexican border, so Arizona, New Mexico area. Utah paradox, that is something that's been documented by Utah doctors, and they're just noticing that there's a mixture in that state between this suicide and depression as contrasted to other people who are happy. So it's a very strange dynamic that's going on in that state, that you've got a mixture of these suicidal and depression people alongside these happy people. So that's kind of what they're documenting is two types of altitude sickness. So one makes people down and the other one makes them high. So this Utah paradox is right at an altitude where both conditions occur in people, and it's noticeable to the doctors. The hypoxia blues, that's very well known in high altitude states. So generally what happens is sea level adapted people move to high altitude states and they get sickly there and they start experiencing these hypoxia blues. So that's common to see in high altitude states like Colorado. So let's carry on. An area I have been researching is suicide islands. The higher an island is, the higher its suicide rate seems to be. This can clearly be seen in the Canary Islands, Spain. The lower islands to the east have a lower suicide rate as compared to the higher islands to the west. The main islands from east to west are Eastern Islands, 2,201 feet Lanzarote, 2,648 feet Fuerteventura, 6,417 feet is Gran Canaria. So these are relatively low altitude islands, with the exception of Gran Canaria, because Gran Canaria is actually above where they call high altitude. High altitude starts at 4,900 feet. So Gran Canaria is starting to get tall and may start triggering altitude sickness in people. So the Western Islands are the 12,188 feet high Tenerife, 4,879 feet La Gomera, 7,949 feet La Palma. I used to live and work in La Palma. And 4,925 feet El Hierro. So you can see like these western islands are significantly higher than the eastern islands. So let's see what's going on with the suicide rates. The suicide rates for the Canary Islands in 2007 were East Canary Islands, lower altitude, 4 to 7.9 per 100,000 residents. West Canary Islands, higher altitude, 8 to 9.9 per 100,000 residents. The average suicide rate for Spain is 7.06 per 100,000 residents. So you can see when you're at low altitude, the low altitude suicide rate is low. When you're at high altitude, the suicide rate is much higher. So you can clearly see that in the Canary Islands. And the Canary Islands, for those who don't know, they're off the coast of Africa. So if you just go west of the Sahara Desert, you'll come out to the Canary Islands in the Atlantic Ocean. As you can see, the higher Western Canary Islands have a higher suicide rate than the national average in Spain and the lower Eastern Islands. I have been to most of the Canary Islands, and driving around the higher islands takes you to much higher altitudes than the lower islands. There are a lot of people living at altitude in the Western Canary Islands. Notable populated areas are Tenerife, 4,668 feet Villaflor de Chasna, 3,382 feet Aguamansa, 1,781 feet San Cristobal de la Laguna, and La Palma has 2,739 feet Barrial, 2,293 feet Fuencaliente. So you can clearly see that these are very high towns. You're far higher than sea level in these towns, and particularly up here. You're getting close to where the official start of high altitude sickness starts. So it's just a couple of 100 feet below. So let's take a look at La Palma. So La Palma is known as the world's steepest island, and it is easy to get high very quickly in a car in La Palma. Indeed, the main highway between the main population centers in the east and west sides of La Palma takes you through a tunnel that is 3,612 feet high. The bulk of the La Palma population seems to live at about 1,000 feet, and they seem to regularly commute between sea level and 3,612 feet. This regular changing of altitude appears to keep them in a state of malacclimatization. So this changing of altitudes that people do by driving can keep you in a state of malacclimatization where the roads are significantly changing altitude and the towns are significantly changing altitude. So it's undesirable to be in this state of malacclimatization because it causes havoc in the cellular system of the human body. And your body will be constantly trying to produce lots of red blood cells when you're up high, and then when you're down at sea level, it'll be trying to kill them off. So if you keep alternating between these altitudes, between sea level and up in the mountains, you're going to be in this malacclimatization state. And it's not just red blood cell production, it's all kinds of stuff, the hormones, all kinds of stuff. I'm not aware of any part of the body that doesn't change in response to high altitude exposure in the sea level adapted human. Once you start getting these altitude exposures, the whole body starts to change. So if you're in a state of malacclimatization because you're changing altitudes regularly, you may actually end up quite sick. More information on Spain's suicide rates can be found here. Suicide in Spain. So it's on Wikipedia, and the article is called Suicide in Spain. So that's where all those numbers came from. They came out of that article. So a similar thing can be seen in Hawaii. This is the 2017 to 2019 suicide rate per county in Hawaii from north, lower, to south, higher. So it's important to realize in Hawaii the islands get taller as you go south, and the tallest island is the southernmost island. So let's take a look at what's going on. So 5,243 feet, Kauai County. So 22 per 100,000 residents commit suicide. So Honolulu is a little bit shorter, 4,025 feet, Honolulu County, 10.7 per 100,000 residents. So we haven't really changed too much. We only changed maybe just over 1,000 feet, and half the suicide rate. So we were 22, we went down to 10.7. So let's have a look at Maui County. So 10,000. So you can see we significantly increased the altitude here. So 10,000 is a big number in the high altitude community, and tends to be a line of demarcation between where people die. So below 10,000 feet, you generally don't see too many deaths. But once you get over 10,000 feet, you start seeing people dying from altitude sickness, and they get very, very sick very quickly above 10,000 feet. And we're particularly talking about sea level adapted humans here. So people that are genetically adapted to sea level get very sick above 10,000 feet. So what's going on in Maui County? So 18.4 per 100,000 residents. Okay, so that's it's approaching Kauai. So we're going to go even higher. So 13,800 feet, Hawaii County. It's 21.4 per 100,000 residents. So the two highest suicide rates are Kauai County, which is at 5,243 feet, and Hawaii County at 13,800 feet. So we've got like a difference between Kauai and Hawaii in altitude, but we've got almost the same suicide rate. So we're going to look into what the strange things are that are happening in Kauai a little bit later in the chapter that may be causing this high suicide rate in Kauai. But you can certainly see the trend in these counties. So we go from 4,000 with 10.7, 10,000 has 18.4, 13,800 has 21.4. So it clearly increases with altitude on these islands. With the exception of Kauai, the suicide rates are clearly increasing with island altitude. Hawaii Island has the second highest suicide rate and has the highest mountain in Hawaii. Mauna Kea is 13,800 feet high. Like La Palma in the Canary Islands, many people live at around 1,000 feet high. The main highway between the two population centers of Hilo and Kona peaks at 6,765 feet. The road is Hawaii State Highway 200, also called Sala Road, and is on the list of most dangerous USA highways. I have experienced descent fatigue numerous times when driving this road. I regard it as dangerous and to be avoided. It has a 60 mile an hour speed limit, and the risk of a head-on crash is high. It commonly has bad weather on it all year round, and driving through foggy clouds is frequent. Regular high-altitude commuting is prevalent on the higher Hawaiian Islands, and malacclimatization will be in the population. So that's particularly prevalent on the Big Island because the roads get very high on the Big Island. The outlier is the relatively low island of Kauai, which has the highest suicide rate in Hawaii. Kauai has also had high rates of COVID-19 during the pandemic. The only reasonable explanation I can come up with as to why the suicide rate and COVID-19 rate are so high in Kauai is that the Pacific Missile Range facility is there. This is one of the most unusual military bases in the world. As such, there will be a wide range of emissions associated with it. Due to this military base, I have excluded Kauai from my suicide analysis in Hawaii. You can find out more here. So you want to find more about this Pacific Missile Range facility, you'll find it on the Wikipedia article, Pacific Missile Range Facility. The Hawaii suicide death rate is on the HawaiiHealthMatters.org website, and the Hawaii COVID-19 data is on the Hawaii government coronavirus website. We're going to wrap up this chapter with the statement: altitude-induced suicide in high-altitude areas is very well understood. So this increasing suicide rate with increasing altitude has been understood for a very, very long time by the medical profession. So that's what surprised me when I researched this chapter, was that so much was known about it, and I had never been told about it. I worked in high-altitude professional astronomy for almost a decade. I'd never heard of it until I started researching this book, Toxic Altitude. So that's where that chapter came from, was the medical research on suicides and the suicide data that the government collects. So you want to find out more about the toxicity of altitude, you'll find it in this book. This book is written about the professional astronomy community, but it's applicable to pilots, cabin crew, people, truck drivers that drive around the USA who are going to high and very high altitude locations and back down to sea level regularly. Mountain climbers, skiers, hikers, people go hiking in mountains. Anyone who's up in the mountains, this book is a good read, may answer some of your health questions. Important thing about toxic altitude is if you're in this state for a prolonged period, as I was, you may well go on and develop hypoxia, mental illness, and chronic fatigue. So if you've gone into that state, you may find this book an interesting read. And both books talk about the treatments that I developed to treat this hypoxia, mental illness, and chronic fatigue in me. And Health Forensics is an interesting read for anybody who's interested in the many aspects of the environment and how it affects them. So this is a general discussion about health. It has a little bit about altitude in there, but all the altitude in detail is in this book. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like the video. And I wish you the very best of health, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.